Eric Menick and his wife Bethany made the difficult decision of allowing doctors to inject medicine called the venom into their unborn baby. Their baby's lower half was not fully developed. It did not have legs. Bethany had it put into her stomach where the 4-month-old baby had stayed. It was enough to not affect Bethany, but allow the lower half that had not developed to the fetus. Eric was fully aware of the side effects. How his child will have mutated red eyes and highlights in her hair. But he was willing to allow this change. 5 months later, the baby was born, and the parents gave her the full name of Karen Elizabeth Menick. The baby was in perfect health once inspected by doctors, and it was shown that the venom was safe to use and a complete success. Right away, Bethany noticed 2 things. One being that her baby had a circle of hives all around her head, and 2, how pretty her eyes were. Their doctor instructed that they must never cut Karen's hair, not until she turns 15. The hives around the baby's head was actually the pattern of where the red highlights would grow in the future. The doctor was very strict about this, and Eric and Bethany followed his rule without hesitation. In one of the baby rooms at the hospital, a fellow spirit reaper known as Dream Killer floated around the infirmary where the babies were held. In his ghost form, he wandered around and used his powers to steal energy from doctors walking past him. No one is able to see him. Humans are unable to see spirit reapers like himself. When he reached the area where Karen was resting, his tail somehow was getting attached to the baby like a magnet. He tried to escape, but he could not go any farther than a foot. He was by her side from then on. Even when the parents took her home and began to take care of her, it seemed that he would be stuck with her forever. By the time Karen started elementary school, her hair was midway down her back and was very well kept. Bethany learned how to be very gentle with her daughter's hair, since even the slightest touch of the red highlight causes Karen to flinch in pain. Anyway, Karen was a very shy child. She never really talked to most kids in kindergarten, and the kids didn't seem to mind. She never really caused any trouble. Karen was probably the brightest when it came to reading and writing. She loved books, especially history and fantasy. There were 3 kids that really hated Karen. For no main reason really. They just looked at her, noticed her red eyes, and just started to feel uncontrollable rage against her. Their names? Cole, Phil, and Vicky. It may have been of jealousy, but no one really knew. The 3 just spread rumors about her being a self-harmer or planning to kill a teacher. Karen never really noticed the 3 until one day they started to tease her about her hair and eyes. They asked a really offensive question that made Karen feel horrible about her appearance. A couple weeks after that first encounter, Karen started to take advice from her father about defending herself verbally, so if Cole and his friends attacked her, she acted like she does not care and beat them in their own games. This made Cole very annoyed, so much so that he almost hit Karen, but he was called by the teacher. After that, Vicky came up with a brilliant idea. Her idea was to cut off Karen's hair. The 3 were not aware that the red highlights in her hair could actually hurt her. To them, they just looked fake. So to them, why don't they just give her a taste of her own medicine by attacking her physically? Cole agreed, but Phil tried to talk the both into not hurting the girl, but Cole managed to convince Phil by threatening him. On the last day of school, the plan was set into action. After Karen had left along with the other students at the end of the day, Vicky had snuck into the teacher's office and grabbed a large pair of scissors. When Karen walked into the front of the school, waiting for her father, Dreamkiller just flew around the area that was available to him. He tried to remain hidden from Karen. Something in his mind told him not to expose himself to a young girl just yet. Karen started to get worried. All the other kids' parents had arrived, except hers, and soon she was alone. Before she could move, a voice came from the distance. It sounded like Cole. Karen turned completely afraid as she saw the 3 children who had bullied her a few weeks earlier. Vicky took out the scissors and handed them to Cole, and soon they both started to insult Karen yet again, calling her an emo, a slut, and other profound names as they came closer with the scissors. Phil just stood away, not wanting to be involved. Karen begged them to stay away, but Cole's response was to yank one of her red highlights. She screamed in pain. The hives on her head burned, and she felt what seemed like her skull was bleeding. Karen yelled them to stop, that it was really hurting her, and tried to explain that she was born with this unnatural hair color. The kids merely laughed, not believing a word she said. Cole soon kicked her to the ground and rolled her to her back to get full access to her long locks. Then Cole held Karen down by her arms. Meanwhile, Dreamkiller could only watch this cruel treatment done by young children. He couldn't say anything, he couldn't fight back, and he couldn't look away. His eyes were glued on what the kids were going to do next. Vicky sat on Karen's legs and started to slowly cut off her hair. Karen screamed in agonizing pain as Vicky cut her hair shorter and shorter. Eventually Eric had arrived to the school, only to find his daughter being attacked. He jumped out of his truck and screamed the kids away from his screaming child. The 3 were terrified and stood paralyzed as Eric picked up his daughter. Dreamkiller was very annoyed at this point, so he tries to deal with these children. He uses his power to steal energy from Phil and transfer it to Eric. Eric soon started to feel very enraged, and a split second later, he could only see red. When he broke out of his daze, he saw that all 3 of the kids were killed by him alone. He looked at his shoes to see bloodstains and began to back away from the 3. Karen sobbed and tried to convince him that he did not do it. Eric didn't know what to think or to do, so he had just ran off and had taken his daughter to the hospital due to the fact that blood was dripping down her head. By the time they reached the ER, Bethany had arrived and demanded an explanation from Eric. While that was happening, Karen was being patched up and speaking with her doctor. Her hair was just up to her neck at this point. Her doctor tried to talk to her about what could have happened, but she was silent and emotionless. The doctor just decided to talk to the parents at that point, and Eric explained that she was jumped by 3 other kids, and they just cut off most of her hair without knowing the truth about it. Bethany was just as shocked as the doctor once she realized what had been done. The doctor had given the 2 a pain-killing like medicine that is specifically used for Karen's case. Eric agreed, and the family went home together to start anew. This had become Karen's father's dark secret for the next 9 years. When Karen was 14 years old, she was a completely different girl. She was extremely mature for her age and had skills in fixing mechanics and cars. She had a boy's cut at this age and frequently cut her hair herself. How do you think she could go through that same pain? The medication she was given, every month she would take a small knife and a pair of scissors and cut off loose end of her hair, and afterwards take one of those pills to erase the pain. Karen had grown to hate pain, the feeling of it specifically. In her opinion, it made her feel weak by becoming victim of the feeling and emotions she would go through when she is injured. Eric and Bethany did not really seem to worry very much about their daughter's behavior. She never got into trouble. She refused to be part of a gang or a bad crowd at her school, and she had decent grades. Karen even asked for her father's help when she wanted him to teach her how to build mechanics. Eric had a huge military background and was a skilled engineer in his youth, so he was happy to help his young daughter with anything that had to do with metal and wire. Though, the only thing they worried about, especially Bethany, was Karen's constant times she cuts her hair or lectures about how she hates the feeling of pain. One day, while Karen was out with a couple of her school friends, Bethany wanted to talk to Eric about the sudden attitude that she was going through. She was afraid that she might end up in an asylum or be just rather unhealthy in her future. Eric just tried to play it off, saying that it would only be a phase, but Bethany still begged for an explanation. Since Karen was around her father more than her, she figured he would now more. Bethany then brought up the incident a few years back, and Eric had a harder time hiding the truth. He soon broke down and explained everything, the entire truth. Bethany was now afraid and backed away from him, but Eric explained that he did not remember how it happened, and how Karen said it wasn't his fault somehow. Bethany didn't know what to do, but she knew that this was not going to work. When Karen came home, she barged in on the conversation her parents were having. She stayed completely quiet as they continued to talk. Bethany then asked for a divorce because she felt unsafe in this family. Eric tried to apologize, but Bethany made her final decision. She was fair though, and said that Karen could stay with him. She said she'd rather not be near her. Karen then interrupted the conversation by dropping her backpack to the floor and running to her room. Eric and Bethany could only freeze in horror, knowing that this was going to be their downfall for their child. Eric and Bethany divorced 5 months later. Eric and Karen remained in their hometown of Colorado, and Bethany soon took a plane to Canada to live a new life. Karen was never the same after that, and Eric knew that. After the divorce, Karen seemed like she wanted to avoid all human contact in her life. It was at this time Dream Killer wanted to introduce himself properly. While Karen went outside into the backyard of her house, the Dream Killer started to talk to her, saying sarcastically how horrible Karen's life is at the moment, and that she needed a friend to comfort her. From that point, he floated in front of her with an evil, sharp-toothed grin on his face. Karen was startled, but not afraid of him. She had read so many books about ghosts that it didn't really faze when she found out one was actually in front of her. Dreamkiller explained that he has been attached to her ever since she was a baby, and that it wasn't intentional. Karen noticed the purple tail sticking from her back. She wondered why she never noticed him before, but then again, she did remember hearing him during the incident back when she was 5 years old. The two started a conversation, but Eric soon came out and asked who Karen was talking to. It was then she realized no one is able to see Dreamkiller except for her. Dreamkiller also knows that he could get huge amounts of energy by just talking to this human, and that he could read her mind. It was very unusual, but to the both of them, this could have been an interesting friendship. Or so he thought. The next year, Karen was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She was assigned with medication that was supposed to calm her so she doesn't go into violent outbursts. That was the only minor change in the 15-year-old's life. But at the end of her freshman year, Eric introduced his new fiancée, Tiffy Lavender. Karen was a bit baffled, but she didn't stop her father. Tiffy seemed like a nice woman, but soon Karen was introduced to a boy that was only 2 years older than her. His name was Mike. He was a very laid-back and kind person. He introduced himself to Karen after hearing the news, saying how they are pretty much stuck together now. Karen didn't smile very often, but at that moment, she gave a very faint smile at Mike's remark. Eric lit up once he realized that maybe this boy could cheer her up, his already hurt daughter. Mike and Karen never really talked very much when they were left alone. When Mike got bored and could not get a conversation of his stepsister, he would devote to his favorite hobby, NASCAR. Mike was a huge fan of NASCAR since he was very young, and he once dreamed of being a race car driver. Though, he always had trouble with learning the mechanization of a vehicle. This got Karen's attention, and she always teased him when she made statements and facts about how to build a car. The two then started to communicate more often, and they seemed to become really good friends. They even told each other they could start their own company together. Mike even came up with a nickname for his sister. He called her Car because of her love of machines. Things started to go downhill by the time Karen turned 16. Eric's fear of his daughter getting into a bad crowd finally came true when she came home with a bag full of stolen items and gold. Karen tried to explain herself, but her father was furious. To her surprise, he threatened her to give him the bag or he'll kill her. Karen got scared and threw the bag at her father and dashed up to her room. Mike then talked to Karen about how Eric started drinking and that he sometimes had a violent temper. Eric tried to keep his daughter out of trouble, even though she claimed that she stole so she could help the family. It would not make the cut. Tiffy eventually started to become the authority figure in the family due to Eric's constant drinking. She helped Karen learn from right and wrong and tried to explain that this was not the path that her child will not subside to. Karen understood, though she hated that she was being treated like a 5-year-old. Mike and Karen decided to spend the weekend together at a roller derby, while Tiffy stayed to take care of Eric. Karen tried to fight the feeling to steal something, but because she didn't have any money on her, she ended up stealing a few pieces of equipment from a shop near the derby before the two arrived home. Mike didn't say anything to her father due to Karen's request, but soon Eric would find out. It was only about a month when Eric had caught Karen stealing again. This time, he was physical. He jumped his daughter in drunken outrage, and Karen reacted in self-defense. She had become overwhelmed with anger and stress due to her bipolar disorder, and kicked her father and almost broken his ribs. Karen then proclaimed that she was done with him and her family, and started to pack a bag. Everyone was trying to stop her, but she pushed them away and took Tiffy's laptop and left the home without another word. She only got away with a small amount of supplies, but in her mind, she had better ways of getting what she wanted. Karen started to take full advantage of her robbing skills, and she taught herself the wonder of stealth. She was caught by police a couple times, and when they asked about her information and who she was, she referred herself as Kar Thorn, and she referred to herself to that name for a long time. After many break-ins and several escapes from police, Kar made a name for herself, but she herself was smart enough to never be sent to prison. By the time she turned 17, Kar had become a rebellious thief. One day, Kar checked into a motel to get a bit of rest. When she decided to explore the internet on her laptop, or Tiffy's laptop, she explored many social networks, until she found one called Omegle. She decided to start an account just because she thought it would be good to interact with people from possibly around the state. After a while, she started up her account and set up her webcam and prepared for who she was about to come face to face with. Right away, another girl popped up on screen, and she waved at Kar with a cheery smile. Kar looked at her screen confused. This girl had teal-colored hair and piercing green eyes. Kar also noticed snakebite piercings below the girl's lower lip. Kar waved nervously and said hello, and from that point the two seemed to start a conversation rather quickly. The girl introduced herself as Prue Crane. She explained about her life and her personality before letting Kar introduce herself as well. Kar told Prue just to refer to herself as Kar because, due to her past experience with police departments, she didn't want to be snitched, plus she loved her new name. Prue seemed to like Kar very well. She thought she was a badass because of her cocky yet insightful personality, along with her red and black hair, which had grown halfway down her neck at this point. The two started to talk to each other on many other social networks, and every day they talked about their own stories, about each other's lives and their own interest. It stayed that way for a couple months, until one day, Prue asked Kar to come live with her in her hometown of New York. Kar didn't know what to say or what to do, but Prue explained that she could help by hacking into her parents' bank account to get money for a plane ticket. Kar got excited and agreed to the decision. Prue turned out to be an extremely talented hacker. Kar arrived in New York on July 4th and met Prue in person at the airport. After a couple hours of talking, the two set off to Prue's apartment complex. The apartment itself was rather big. It had up to 4 bedrooms, though the odd thing was that 2 of the rooms appeared to be taken, but Prue looked like she lived alone, given what Kar had seen through her webcam in the past. Prue explained that she lived with an old school friend of hers since he was tight for cash, and Prue was generous enough to let him use that extra room since her mother decided to leave her there. Kar just decided to go with it and settled into the 3rd room. Later that night, a man came into the apartment, and Prue instantly greeted him. Kar looked up and waved at him and introduced himself as Robin. He was only about a year older than Kar, and he said he worked at a gym downtown. He said he taught people different fighting styles and how to defend yourself. Kar developed somewhat of a crush on Robin. He had short, dark brown hair and hazel eyes, and every time she looked at him, she felt a bit of happiness in her that she never thought possible. Prue started to figure this out and began teasing her friend every time Robin wasn't around. Another year had passed, and Kar couldn't help but feel homesick for some reason. So far during this year, she started taking those combat classes at Robin's gym due to his request. She started reading a lot more than she's done in the past, and Kar had started building her own motorcycle. But through all of this, she missed her family, and she didn't know why. Maybe it was the lack of photos that she had in her room, since her bedroom walls were covered in posters and pictures from old Norse mythology books she read. Still, she couldn't help but stop and think, do they even care anymore? Kar decided to get her answer. She told Prue that she would be leaving for a couple days, but did not tell her why. Kar figured she would explain everything when she returned to New York. Kar spent a good amount of money she stole into buying a plane ticket back to Colorado, her hometown. When she arrived, she knew the place right away. She had a sharp memory of this place, down to the city she lived, to where her old home was. Her first thought was, great, now they're going to nag me. They're never going to let me go back. They're going to be angry. But to her surprise, when she came into the house, only Tiffy was there, and she almost cried at the sight of her stepdaughter. Tiffy cried tears of joy and hugged Kar tightly, and before she knew it, her stepmother started asking her many questions about her life. Under Kar's better judgment, she explained everything that she knew. Tiffy didn't seem that surprised. Unlike her father, she wasn't planning on punishing her child the way he does. But then again, he turned into an alcoholic at the time Kar ran away. Kar asked Tiffy about her father and Mike, and with a deep sigh, Tiffy explained in the best detail she could. She said that after Kar ran away, Eric had stopped drinking almost immediately, though it took time for him to fight the urge to take a shot, but he soon fought with the help of Mike. Everything was normal for him from that time, but Mike, not so much. The only thing Tiffy managed to tell Kar was that he was planning on joining the military so he could be just like his stepfather. Before Mike and Eric came home, they both looked shocked, but Eric came to his daughter while Mike just stood in place. He seemed a bit annoyed for some reason. The family was all together at that point, and Tiffy decided to cook a family dinner to celebrate the return of Karen, though she still referred to herself as Kar. Everything seemed happy, but Mike didn't seem happy for some reason. Everyone just sat and ate in silence until Kar spoke up, asking how Mike was doing. Mike just narrowed his eyes and said everything was great. Soon, Tiffy started to notice a sudden change in her son. Mike just stood out like a sore thumb, but he kept his gaze on Kar. After what felt like hours, He finally spoke and asked, "Why did you leave us behind? Leave me behind?" Kar looked down confused and attempted to apologize and explain herself, but it seemed like Mike wasn't listening. He kept twisting her words, making it look like she left us because of her arrogant way of life, and at one point called her a monster. Kar became a bit scared because it seemed like Mike's voice was becoming more monotone and deep. Mike stood up from the table and started walking over to Kar like he was about to kill her. Eric and Tiffy attempted to calm him down and tried to block him from getting any closer to Kar, but he had pushed them away in a large amount of strength Kar never knew Mike had before. Mike started insulting her to the point where she started becoming very agitated. A wave of anger overcame her unlike she felt in a long time. But then she remembered she hadn't taken her pills. Kar rushed at Mike and started to throw kicks and punches at him. It stunned Mike for a brief moment before he retaliated, and two were now getting into a full-on battle. For the first time, Dreamkiller wanted to be involved in Kar's life again. For the longest time, he didn't speak with her or cause any trouble. At this point, he knew he had to take Mike down, not because he cared about Kar, but just so he could try a new trick that he discovered. It seemed that Mike was about to win the fight, but soon, Kar heard a familiar voice in the back of her mind. Dreamkiller was talking to her again. After 3 years of nothing, he finally started speaking, and soon, she felt her rage grow larger, and in a way, she didn't feel like herself anymore. Dreamkiller's new trick was what he referred to as switching. Dreamkiller had gained enough energy over the years to control Kar as a puppet. She soon felt a rush of adrenaline and grabbed Mike and pulled him into another room where Eric and Tiffy would not see them. Dreamkiller soon started to take over Kar's body, and her hands started to turn black, and it appeared that her fingers were turning into claws. Mike started to become very afraid and noticed that Kar's face had turned black. Mike kicked his stepsister, pushing her away from him, and at that point, Dreamkiller was fast enough to switch back so the parents would not notice the changes. Mike seemed to be visibly shaken up, and when Eric went to help his daughter, she punched him hard enough to have him fall to his back. Kar breathed heavily and looked at the damage of the fight. She started to feel ill and put her hand over her mouth and shut her eyes tightly. She seemed to be having a panic attack. Without another word, Kar dashed out of the house just as the same as before. She returned to New York a few days later. During those few days, her and Dreamkiller talked about the situation and how he was able to control her body like that. To Dreamkiller's dismay, he didn't know much about what happened, though he said at that moment, he started to feel whole again. When Kar arrived home, Prue asked her about her family, but Kar had just lied about what happened. She was a great liar at this point in her life, and because she was afraid, and she didn't know why. Kar lived a semi-normal life from that point, though Kar felt a huge amount of guilt overwhelm her every moment of her life. She spent the next few years training to be an anti-hero and to prove to the world that you don't need to be a good person to be a hero.